Hey guys, today's story is about a rather unpleasant roommate, and maybe a good testament as to why you probably shouldn't have a roommate as a player in your D&D game. But before we get into the story, I'm sure you've noticed that I sound different. So please, let me know what you think of the new settings. So back in August, I offered to DM for the first time for 3 of my friends that had either never played before or were relatively new to it. I cobbled together a homebrew campaign based on the Frostglade Tundra homebrew with a different storyline and overall world, featuring ghost sightings and strange plane occurrences. I invited my roommate to my table since she had played before with me nicely, and I thought an experienced player would help the newbies. She made an ice-based wizard who had been frozen in ice for thousands of years, who was recently excavated without her memories. Looking back, she repeatedly peer-pressured me before the entire group into giving her cold resistance in an ice campaign to make her even more overpowered. But whatever, it wasn't like she was going to be obnoxious about her strength and take everything overboard, right? Everything that happened, she had a comment for. Oh. There's a boat? Well, she's never seen a boat. There's torches in the room? Ah, what is this strange warm light? Her past civilization is so much better. Oh, there's a horse passing by? She must marvel at the horse, for it is the most beautiful thing that she's ever seen. Oh, there's money? What is that? Her society was a barter economy, don't you know? Everything that I described, she had a comment over the newbies that were trying to learn. I told her to give the others a voice to learn, but it only worsened over time, and she started doing entire actions and decisions as if she was the only player at the table, or at least the only one that mattered. She would try to overtake the scene a lot, especially in battle where she would brag about damage and the superiority of wizard classes, and then complain that other members were making her waste spell slots by not dealing tons of damage, or not fighting correctly. The biggest event, though, was when she completely overtook my rogue's perfect time to shine, which I had crafted just for them since they came to me saying that they felt left out, mostly due to my roommate's main characteritis. The rogue worshipped Phoenix, the god of thieves, and their backstory was that their temple was burned, and the community scattered by a rival god's worshippers. And they were gathering money to start a new temple, while attempting to find the scattered members of their former thieves guild. The party nearly gets pickpocketed by a bunch of thieves, one possessing the symbol of Phoenix, a little hook for their backstory. The rogue charisma'd the thief away from the guard arresting him to question about their missing guild family, taking the bait perfectly. The entire time, the roommate was tucked away in a tavern, ignoring the party fighting the pickpockets, up until the last rounds, because she was on her phone. The rogue pulled the thief into an alleyway, with the rest of the party trailing behind, and struck a deal for information on their family in exchange for escaping the guards. The rest of the party was slightly uneasy that it would ruin their reputation and risk their employment as they watched the 2 thieves run away. But the rogue nodded and started figuring out a reputation-preserving and really cool plan to uphold the deal. It was all really amazing roleplay, and I was really super proud of my rogue and just how far their RP had come since the start. And we had gotten the chance to have a reoccurring NPC for the rogue story to be further involved in the campaign. My roommate tried to butt in a few times because it was her time, not the rogue's, and she got tired of watching someone else RP without her input. So when she butted into the conversation again to try to demand to join in on the negotiations, the thief called her out on butting in on a nearly done deal, and she responded by threatening to ice blast him for information instead. The rest of the party was shocked and tried to pacify her in roleplay, but she continued to threaten and butt in so hard on the moment that I had to stop the game in its tracks to meta and tell her off, as she was preventing any meaningful RP and was angering the table. My roommate eventually huffed and seethed and said that apparently she can't do what she wants. But let us start fresh. She also tried to cast Fireball her way through someone else's RP moment. We tried to move on and put together a pretty nice plan. And everyone got their own special moments, by the way. Our former fighter, who was a sailor, got to negotiate passage on ships, and a ghostly hummingbird, which was her dead father, regularly shows up to try to point in the direction of her kidnapped sister. Our rogue had the skeevy thief regularly come back with info on their lost community through his grapevine, and ghosts that died in the temple fire regularly appear to poke at them for pranks. Our bard had an entire subplot where they came to forgive the god that they rejected due to the loss of their mentor/uncle and the theft of their uncle's prized vial that they inherited soon after. And as for my roommate, they regularly got memories slowly recovering from their tangled mind and located traces of their long-dead civilization alongside the ghosts of the ancient past darting in and out. There was time for everyone to shine, and if anyone felt left out, I added more hooks for them. Another thing that really ticked me off was when they hit level 4. She took the Elementally Adept feat so that she could ignore resistances to cold damage, since she realized that being an ice wizard in cold resistance land was a little unwise when it came to the more icy foes. She then threw fit at me since cold immunity was still immunity, and she wanted immunities made into resistances. I told her that I would weigh that and determine if I would allow her or not. I ended up not, since she already applied cold resistance to herself, and she didn't like that. When the session began after that level up, she unexpectedly asked everyone to come to the tavern, with no communication to me what she was doing or planning, and she wouldn't tell me even when I asked. So I waited to see what she was doing. Maybe it will be something interesting and engaging. It wasn't. She gathered everyone up and gave them all a long speech that her powers were growing stronger and her ice magic was cold to those that resist it, and even immune to it. I grabbed the first pause I could in her speech and speared the scene away quickly back into DM control. Very weirded out and rather miffed that she implied that immunity was changed, and also rambled about how cool she was for what probably would have been about 3 or 4 minutes if I didn't cut her off. I tried to talk to her about it afterwards, and she was completely unresponsive to my concerns. But she did acknowledge that immunity is immunity. But as time went on, other things became worse. Out of character, she would be constantly on her phone, even when I told her to put it down, and she would act annoyed, bored, and tired. She would also then spend over a minute figuring out simple turns. I tried to implement a 45-second rule on turns, or use skip, and she repeatedly shot it down, saying that it made her anxious, and she wouldn't abide to it. As a first-time DM, I was too meek for her at that point, which my party paid for. She only got worse at bragging and arguing semantics in battle, and she started getting hostile to my other players. She would act miserable the entire time, and then claim that she was having fun whenever I asked. And every time someone would cheer or laugh at normal volume, she would cover her ears and act like she was in pain, even from across the room. But she would refuse to wear headphones or regulate in any way. She would also meta the other players to the point where she would threaten the other characters with spells, despite her character not knowing that anything was amiss. And this became such an issue that she made the rogue have a panic attack. And on top of this, we also suspected that she was starting to fudge rolls. Out of game, she was also becoming an even worse roommate, becoming even more short-tempered and refusing to clean the house to the point where her parents would have to come in and do it for her every few weeks, and started becoming verbally abusive and threatening me. I tried to be peaceful at first and was more pliant than I would be with a non-roommate, since I lived with her and she paid more in rent and utilities. I was honestly scared that she would stop what little she did for the house and her chronically vomiting cats, and pull something like try to change the money agreement in revenge or start taking things out on me more. I was a victim of financial and child abuse in the past, so I was not messing with all that in the early months, especially with my roommate getting more and more verbally violent and vengeful to people around her in everyday life. After she started getting worse, I was seriously ready to tackle this, despite my fears, if for my poor players that didn't deserve this. I spent weeks with the other players working through a letter to text to her. Something firm, but not set off her shortened temper. To put a stop to this, but not risk my safety or peace of home. I didn't want to end the campaign, as that would cause shockwaves, and my players wanted to keep going. But I needed her to shape up if she was going to continue with us. The letter ended up not getting sent, as it all came to a head in one session in late November. I had communicated a bit of the letter verbally before session, that we would be using communal dice trays, since we suspected that she was cheating on top of it all, and meta would be cracked down upon. She was resistant the whole way, and during the session, she was worse than usual. She tried to use her own dice tray, and wouldn't count out her dice or tell me what spells that she was using. She would glare at anyone even speaking too loud, and was on her phone constantly and looking pissed to even be there. Every time, she would roll high over and over again, and every time that she said something self-centered, my players would share looks. Everyone was miserable, and my roommate texted me that she wanted to leave soon. I was exhausted from trying to nanny her all night, to curb her as she blatantly disregarded all of our conversations. And my final exams were in a week on top of it all. We took a pause for everyone to refill their waters, and I sat there, thinking about how I didn't want to be here. My players were miserable, as was I, and I saw no way out of this without causing a huge scene and risking the rest of my lease and face a vindictive roommate. I didn't want to be DMing. I didn't ever want to DM again, at that moment. And when it was time to start up again, I shifted a bit from where I was, hunched at the table. I hid my face from roommate, and shot distressed looks at the people that could see me, trying to signal them to do something. I wasn't even sure at the time. They asked if I was alright, and I told them that I was a little lightheaded, and then I burst into sobs. I was inconsolable. I needed to get out of there, and away from the roommate. Two of my dear friends had leapt up and escorted me outside so that I could get some air, and then I just broke down on them about how scared and trapped I felt. I think it hit me then and there how terrified I was of my roommate and what she could do and how I felt legitimately unsafe. I couldn't cut her off as she lived with me and had every ability to hurt me if she wished, and she was getting shorter and shorter tempered by the day. My friends got me calm enough to try to figure out a game plan. I would drive my roommate home, then slip off after a bit to join the rest of the party at one of their houses, and we could all figure out a plan together. At that meeting, we decided to suspend sessions under the guise of finals and winter break, and just not meet for a bit, just to let things cool. After school started again for the players in college, we would play with just the three of them and simply not mention anything about resuming to my roommate. We would just let the roommate think that we just never started up again, and if they asked after everything, just claim that we just never got back together after a month-and-a-half long disruption of breaks. We could go back to enjoying sessions, not abandon all of my homebrew work, and we could pull the kill switch at any time during the break to shut it down completely if we weren't up to it. We actually found a replacement member during the break. One of our rogue's friends that was a former DM, and that they had known for years. I agreed to let them in the Discord, with the assurance that they were nice. The plan went off without a hitch. The new player was a sweetheart, and they played a vampire warlock and fit right in. The first session back was like a breath of fresh air. We had no problem player, and a very sweet new one that was fun, who also had no chance of cheating. The roommate, to this day, has never asked about D&D starting up again, and has had no retribution pointed at me. She's still a terrible roommate, but it's so much nicer when I don't have to interact with her, and she has much less control over me. My table is happy, and as am I. Looking back, this was a very precarious situation that I put myself in, and maybe the no roommates rule shouldn't only be for dating, but also for DMing. But I never thought that it would end up like this in a million years. I never thought that she would devolve from a messy roommate to a near dangerous one. But what matters is that I'm safe now. I have assurance that when the kitchen goes to hell, I only have to wait until the weekend when her mom comes into town to clean for her. And my main concerns are stepping in the cat vomit that she doesn't want to clean and getting my good furniture out of there when my lease expires. I know this one was a long one, but thanks for listening.